Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this week's From the Field Farm Chat with Idaho Wheat. My name is Ryan Mortensen. I'm the Communications and Programs Manager for the Idaho Wheat Commission. Thank you all for joining us today. Just a couple of reminders. Questions and comments are welcome. If you just want to raise your hand, pop something in the chat, or you can take yourself off mute, and I'll be sure to get your comment or question asked to our speaker today. So today for our From the Field, we're diving into the world of agricultural trade, a topic that affects everything from what ends up on your dinner table to the global markets our farmers rely on. And our guest today is Ben Connor. Ben is a partner at DTB AgriTrade, where he helps clients navigate the complex world of trade policy. So Ben, that's all I'll say for you. I'll turn the time over to you if you want to give our audience a brief introduction of you and what you do for DTB AgriTrade, and then we'll kind of just dive into a conversation.
Sounds great. And thank you. It's a pleasure to be on here. So I'm, like I said, my name is Ben Connor. I'm with DTB AgriTrade. If you haven't heard of us, that's fine. It's a very small boutique consulting firm that's focused on agriculture and food trade policy based in Washington, D.C. We've been around since 2000. I joined the firm in 2019. Before that, I spent 5 years with U.S. Wheat Associates. And so worked on trade policy for them for a number of years, and then before that, I was with Senator Mike Johans from Nebraska, and I worked on agriculture and trade policy for him in Washington on Farm Bill and other trade policy related topics.
Great, thank you. And knowing that you came from a U.S. Wheat background was kind of an extra plus for us because you kind of already have an idea of who we are and what we do as state wheat commissions. So I just want to kind of dive right in to this conversation, Ben. Really, everything's just kind of at an unknown right now. We're not really sure what trade policy is looking like, what tariffs are looking like. Can you share about a time when tariffs have really rippled or shaken up the U.S. agriculture market, and what were the farmers' response? How did they respond? What happened there?
Yeah. So probably the biggest example to mention is the U.S.-China trade war, I guess you call it, back in 2018-19. So, I mean, that was, obviously big impacts, especially on the soybean market and others. And then the response was, well, it depended on the commodity because it wasn't just soybeans. I mean, that's our biggest export category to China, but wheat got hit too. Corn, a number of specialty crops, you could go down the list. And the response, I mean, from farmers, of course, the prices went down, but then there was also an active push with the administration, with the USDA, and they were able to put together a policy package of payments to help offset some of that loss. And then for commodities where payments didn't really make as much sense, there were purchases that were done, they were put in school lunches, things like that. So actually right now there's the U.S. tariffs on Brazil are creating similar effects in that market, where a lot of what they exported to us before isn't, they can't sell it now. So they're doing the same thing. They're going out and buying commodities and things along those lines. So, I mean, these definitely have ripple effects in the policy realm. And then, of course, not everyone was made completely whole, and you had all sorts of, downstream effects. I mean, another example, that's the most prominent one. There was U.S. Apple exports to India, I believe, were also hit with retaliatory tariffs. But then that hit a lot of the exports that were coming out of the Pacific Northwest, Washington in particular. But then they had to find new markets quickly because apples don't stay good for that long. So that was being pushed back into other parts of the U.S. And so you had Pennsylvania apple producers who aren't exporting at all, we're still getting their markets hit. So these things have ripple effects. There's a lot of different ramifications in the the ag and broader economy of tariffs, and I'm sure we'll dive deeper into that.
Yeah, for sure. When we talk about trade agreements like the USMCA or TPP, a lot of that conversation can feel abstract. How do these deals actually show up, and how would a farmer see these in their day-to-day operations?
Yeah, so I mean, they're definitely more abstract than putting a seed in the ground and watching it grow, right? But they do have a lot of real world impacts, and so with USMCA or NAFTA before that, that capped the tariffs. Well, supposedly capped the tariffs. Let's just put the current situation aside, but cap them at a certain level, which guarantees market access. In the case of Mexico, capped them at zero for the most part. So that guarantees market access for almost all commodities. Of course, there are some other issues like potato access and things like that some of your listeners might be familiar with. But there's having those rules in place provides some stability for the markets, allows market development to occur. That's something the U.S. Wheat did a lot of course, and Idaho Wheat Commission was heavily involved in that, was helping to build those markets. And when you have that, that's stability locked in with these trade agreements, that gives you and your buyers in those markets confidence to go and invest and create those relationships, those long-term relationships that have benefited wheat growers substantially. But then of course it also gives some advantages too, right? So TPP, since we're not members of TPP, that gives advantages to those who are. Now, most of the TPP countries we already had trade agreements with, or they had zero tariffs, and even Vietnam, which I think was the one remaining after Japan was negotiated, that still had wheat tariffs in place. I believe they've lowered those down to zero now, but that's not locked in through a trade agreement at this point. So when you have that, the trader looking, it has looking at different origins. If they see that they have a 5% tariff in Vietnam because on U.S. wheat, then that creates a premium that, say, Canadian wheat or Australian wheat wouldn't have.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're abstract, but they do create create advantages and disadvantages in the marketplace. Advantages almost entirely for those who are members of the agreements, and disadvantages for those who aren't. And unfortunately, there are a lot of agreements that we're not members of with a lot of different countries.
Yeah. You mentioned Canada, Australia, with competitors for Idaho, Canada, Russia, Australia in the wheat market. How do U.S. tariffs or trade barriers affect Idaho wheat farmers in general to compete internationally?
Sorry, so the tariff barriers, I just didn't quite hear that.
Yeah, no. So with our competitors like Canada, Russia, and Australia, how do U.S. tariffs or trade barriers affect Idaho farmers' ability to compete?
Oh yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So tariffs are a tax, right? It's
right.
It's functionally what it is. It's a tax on the value of the imports. So if you have, there's the old saying that if you want less of something, just tax it. So that's kind of what's happening with, and that's of course what's happening with the tariffs now, because President Trump is very concerned about the amount of imports that we're getting based on, relative to how much we're exporting. So he wants to reduce the amount of imports. Well, it's the same thing. If we have tariff differentials in other countries, if they have tariffs on, U.S. exports, and then our trading partner or our competitors, excuse me, don't have those tariffs, then that encourages exports from those countries versus ours. And there's other factors, as you well know. I mean, soft white wheat from Idaho is a a unique product that Russia and others can't replicate.
Sure.
So that's an advantage. But there's also a lot of millers who can do a lot of impressive stuff, and so it's not an absolute advantage, right? So there's there might be a premium they're willing to pay, but if you start adding taxes on top of that, then that's just going to become part of the equation of their calculation of what to buy, and at some point, U.S. wheat's going to be priced out.
Sure. So far, wheat hasn't really been affected by anything that's been put into motion by the current administration. Do you see upcoming global trade negotiations impacting wheat or the wheat industry in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, right now, there's been very little retaliation. China, of course, has, and I mean, there's been, I don't want to say little retaliation because it is significant what has happened, but there's a lot less, I think, than people were initially expecting, given the scope of the tariffs. So China has retaliated, Canada retaliated, but we're not sending much wheat to Canada, right? But then otherwise, I mean, the EU has threatened it. There have been others that have made noises about it, but it's not. We're not seeing it to the point where it's where I think that a lot of retaliation is imminent. Personally, I think that a lot of these countries are waiting to see what happens with the Supreme Court. And of course, President Trump, they saw what happened with China and President Trump's reaction to China retaliating. And I think nobody wants to go through that right now. So that might be able to stave off some of that retaliation and the impacts on wheat, which would be great if we can keep that up. And I think there are a lot of opportunities from these negotiations as well. I mean, say what you will about the strategy or the outcomes achieved so far. I mean, we're having a lot of talks with a lot of different countries, and we're talking about things like non-tariff barriers and their tariff barriers on U.S. ag exports. And President Trump cares a lot about getting ag market access. I mean, it's something that he specifically mentions pretty frequently, probably more frequently than just about any other president. Would this be my strategy? Maybe not, but I'm not the president. He is. He has the prerogative here. So, we'll watch that play out, and we'll be engaged in it. But there's a lot that's happening, a lot of opportunities, and so I expect there will be some wins for wheat coming out of these negotiations, depending on how they ultimately proceed. Because I referenced the court cases, right? But there's risks.
Sure. And our farmers are very familiar with risk. So yeah. You mentioned non-tariff barriers. So non-tariff barriers like food security, food safety. Can you explain how non-tariff barriers can affect farmers? Or is there an effect for farmers with non-tariff barriers?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know how much biotech wheat is grown in the U.S. right now, but I'm guessing it's still a pretty small percent, if any. And that's just, I'm guessing that's also probably not because farmers would refuse to plant it out of principle. It's because we have a lot of trading partners who are, whether it's in this case, in some cases, it's actual government policy that makes it more difficult. In others, it's just because of perceptions of how their consumers would react to it. But that's just one example of how those kinds of barriers can affect what happens back on the farm.
Sure.
You know, pesticides is another one. Where these trade agreements can address how science is used, or basically require that science needs to be used to set standards for pesticides. But if you don't have a particular standard in place in another country where you have a residue limit, then you might get told by the elevator that you're selling to that we can't send this product on and downstream if you guys are using this product, this pesticide upstream, even if it's perfectly safe. If they don't have approval in the foreign market, that's going to affect the marketability of that wheat. So it's these non-tariff barriers definitely have upstream impacts on the farmers from those foreign markets.
So you're probably familiar with the export process and how wheat goes from field to market. Idaho Wheat often moves via the Columbia Snake River system in the Pacific Northwest. How do trade policies interact with transportation costs or logistical bottlenecking, any impact on the transportation side of these trade policies or tariffs that can be put into place?
Yeah, I mean, transportation is primarily it's a domestic issue in how it's regulated. So there's not, if you look at trade agreements, they're not typically, they won't typically have provisions that relate directly to, how a river systems regulated or operated, or how to use the dams or things like that, right? But absolutely, I mean, that if you have problems on the river system that is raising your costs, and then you have a trade policy where you also have higher costs, or alternatively, if you have a trade policy where it's giving you access, that might offset some of the costs of the river system. Sure. And of course, if you have a well-functioning transportation system, then that gives you a lot of advantages over other origins where it's more costly and more inefficient. So it all affects the marketing of grain and how competitive we can be as a supplier.
Okay. Yep, that makes sense. Going back to your comment about previous tariff issues with the U.S. and China, have there been lessons learned or changes in mindset from recent tariff disputes that could help with future trade strategies?
Yeah, well, in one sense, it's too early to say, right? I mean, we're still kind of in the middle of that U.S.-China, it's called realignment of trade policy, right? That, and it's not just President Trump either. I mean, this is a bipartisan issue of how much do we let China get away with policies that were disruptive to U.S. manufacturing. I mean, from the ag side, of course, China getting wealthier has also vastly increased their consumption of ag goods, which is why we've been able to sell so much. And so there's say pros and cons there. But I think that there is going to continue to be some realignment, and a lot of the lessons from that. Well, I'll just say one of the lessons that President Trump took from the last Section 301 was the statute that he uses for imposing those tariffs, was that there were too many exclusions in that process. It kind of it didn't address enough the fundamental problems that he and his administration saw in the way China was doing business, was basically incentivizing exports. So I think that, if I'm not saying that was the right lesson to learn, but I think that's informed his strategy this time around with the use of the call them IEEPA tariffs, and these Liberation Day, April 2nd tariffs that are now applied globally. I think if you want to call it maybe not the failures, but at least the way those tariffs played out, and same with USMCA, that there was a lot of Chinese investment in Mexico that created led to more imports from Mexico, or at least that's the way it was perceived.
Sure.
So they are looking at how do we revise USMCA to have a different approach to China. So again, we're still very much in the middle of this. Maybe even early days of a longer term shift, but it could also swing, depending on who's elected next. And so, I'd say it's maybe still too early to know what lessons to fully draw from this.
I'm glad to hear you say Trump learned some kind of a lesson. That feels like progress a little bit, maybe.
Well, depends who you ask, right? I mean, I would say that a lot of our other trading partners didn't like the lesson that
Sure.
he learned.
Trade policy, as we know, can change overnight. Advice for farmers. We have a good handful of farmers on listening today. Advice for farmers trying to stay ahead of the curve.
So buckle up is one. That's not what you wanted to hear. But I also, and seriously, I think the administration is hearing from stakeholders, farmers, manufacturers, others all the time about the uncertainty that this is creating in the markets. So I know that they're trying to get these deals wrapped up and as many as possible by the end of the year is what I've heard. But so they are hearing that. Now, of course, there was a US-EU deal, and then a couple weeks later, President Trump threatened tariffs because of their antitrust fine on Google. So, whether these deals are the end of tariffs or not, I don't know. But I know they're hearing that. They're very aware of the impacts, but they do have their policy goals that they're trying to achieve, and they see they have a lot of opportunities to try to get more market access, to get more investment in the U.S. So that's what's driving them. So we'll see how successful it is, and of course, the Supreme Court still has to weigh in. So they're gonna hear. It's on the docket for early November. I think it's the first week in November, the first session of November, whatever it is. So maybe by the end of the year, we'll have a decision on the IEEPA tariffs. But then there's going to be more tariffs under other authorities, regardless of whether these IEEPA tariffs go away. So to stay ahead of the curve, I'd say just pay attention. There's a lot of good reporting that's being put out on this. I'm sure the State Wheat Commission, the U.S. Wheat, others are putting out good information on this. So there's only so much you can really do there just from a risk management perspective, and I work in Washington, right, on policy. I'm not going to advise you on your risk management strategy, so you wouldn't want to listen to me. But as far as the policy side of things, I mean, also just if you have stories, if you have impacts, good or bad, your members of Congress, the administration, they like hearing those for the most part, and whether they like it or not, you should share with them. So yeah, that's what I'd recommend.
A question from one of our listeners, curious as to why you think we did not see the retaliatory tariffs we all expected this time.
Yeah, well, I mean, for one, President Trump said that if you retaliated, then he was going to match your retaliation. And so there were, and China ignored that, and they went ahead and did it anyways, and they still have a lot of retaliation in place. And then Canada did as well, but and I think there was also, I mean, especially when those tariffs were first announced, you had two things, right? You had China retaliation was immediate. I think a lot of other countries were waiting and stepping back, seeing how this plays out, especially as the stock markets were tanking at the time. So they saw that those tariffs came down on most other countries, and they saw that the tariffs went way up on China. So I think the combination of just seeing how that played out made them all just take a more of a wait and see approach on this and engage in this negotiating process. If whether that keeps up or not, I don't know. I think it's going to depend on the political pressures in their countries too. So if the EU starts losing a lot of wine exports, or in Brazil and India, they both have 50% tariffs. If they start seeing a lot more people out of work, then the pressure is going to build for them to retaliate, whether it makes economic or political sense or not, or geopolitical sense. It might make political sense for them to do it for their domestic politics. Farmers can be loud in every country, so we might see more of that. But now I think governments are just trying to keep that pressure at bay.
Sure. With growing geopolitical tensions happening right now, should the agricultural industry expect tariffs to become kind of the new normal in trade?
Well, I mean, I hope not, because I mean, I'm maybe one of the last free traders, right? I mean, I'm not dogmatic about it, right? Like, I don't think we should have free trade in enriched uranium or things like that. But
right.
For the most part, I think that getting the government out of the marketplace is a good thing. But to the extent that it makes sense in the markets, but this system that we have is also allowed for that there's other governments, and our government sometimes like to put their thumb on the scale. And so one, I think that that problem of governments putting their thumbs on the scale and their exports to the U.S. Did create real problems that this administration thinks they're responding to now, and thinks that we need to be have in place for the long term. So I think they're not going to back off on tariffs to the extent that they can. They might back off here and there, but I don't think as an overall strategy that's going to change. And then you also have because tariffs do create incentives, they do protect market actors, or you've been encouraged to invest in a market because of the tariffs that are in place, and you've spent billions of dollars on that that investment, or whatever it is, then your incentive is going to be to protect that investment. So if the tariffs go away, then so I think it's kind of creating its own constituency in defense of the tariffs the longer it stays in place. And I think we've got at least 4 years of this. I mean, we saw with the Biden administration. I mean, they kept in place a lot of the first Trump administration's tariffs. So I just think this is going to be, there might be ways to unwind parts of it, as we're negotiating with trading partners over the longer term. But yeah, in the meantime, I mean, the tariffs are here to stay. It's just, where the adjustments will be, what the strategy looks like from the administration. I mean, that there might be changes, but yeah, it's definitely going to be more of a feature than it had been, for the, let's say the 80s, 90s aughts.
Right. Yeah. So I'm taking away 3 points from our discussion today, Ben. Tariffs are here to stay. Farmers need to buckle up, and farmers need to make their voices heard whenever possible.
Yeah, that works. Yeah, so I'd say keep up the engagement. I mean, and look, I mean, I think there are a lot of opportunities in international markets, and we in agriculture need to be going after those. And so right now, this is the U.S. trade strategy to do that is through these kind of reciprocal tariff actions, and so if we're from my perspective, I want to do as much as I can on behalf of agriculture to help engage in that process. Even if I don't agree with the strategy, I don't want to stand in the way and risk losing opportunities for American farmers just because of my policy perspectives. I know that creating opening markets is good for farmers. So that's where there are opportunities to do that. That's where I want to be. That's where I want to be pushing. So yeah, if you see those opportunities, I know that U.S. wheat is heavily engaged in trade policy. So help them out, give them stories, and yeah, make your voices heard. Make sure your legislators know, but whether the good and the bad. So it's important to keep everyone informed. So
yeah, absolutely. Looks like let's grab a question from Adam. Adam, if you want to unmute your mic, we'll get your question in.
Hey, Ben. First off, thanks for coming on. It's been a long time.
It has been.
Appreciate your thoughts. I did have a couple of questions for you. So the first question, I read an article that Casey Chumrah was included in with the Washington Wheat Commission. And one of the comments that was made in that article, not by her, but by somebody else, was concern that even if other countries don't retaliate with their own retaliatory tariffs, there's a lot of fear that we're going to lose a lot of these long-term trade partnerships that we've worked so hard to gain, that they'll simply go elsewhere. So I guess my question is, have you seen much of a shift in the dynamics of who countries are trading with, or I guess how some of these trade relationships have kind of reworked themselves in the current context?
Yeah, I mean, so I think the most maybe prominent example is with Canada, and just taking American wine off their stores, or American products in general off their store shelves. That's got a lot of play in the media here. But I mean, if you look at Brazil and India, I mean, with the escalation and those tariff rates for what they perceive as political reasons or even sovereignty reasons, that's obviously hasn't been perceived well. Let's say that. So, I mean, obviously, you have people in the market and the business are going to be, they're going to be making decisions, based on their, the economics, their economic situation. But if there's, that doesn't mean that these things don't have an impact. I mean, it's, we hear about this stuff, all around the world. That just the perception of what this is, what the U.S. is doing in its trading relationships is, I mostly hear from government officials in other countries. I'm not doing the, on going to the market development trips anymore, things like that. So you might have a better perspective than I would, but obviously the governments don't, there's a range between offended or, just accepting or, whatever. But I just hope that the longer term, for our relationships, that this will, I don't want to say it's going to be seen as, that it will be a reorientation, where we're able to, we can look back and say, like, this helped shift trading dynamics so that we could address some real policy problems in the global marketplace. And I just hope that if that's the case, there's not too much damage that's done in the meantime. Because this is straining relationships. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
But we'll always have our time together in the MSMBA program at Purdue University, Adam. So you and I are good.
I appreciate that. But one other question, if you don't mind, and I know you did mention you don't want to get into individual farmer risk management, but just from kind of a 10,000 foot level, when I look at the Secretary of Ag's immediate comments after some of these first tariffs were rolled out, one of her first things that she said was that she tried to assure farmers that, look, we're going to put safety net programs in place, which tells me that the expectation from the administration was that, at least in the short term, farmers were going to see harm from these tariffs and from what's going on right now. I read an article recently from AgWeb that said that the highest rate of bankruptcies in the last 10 years was 2019 during the first trade war, the highest rate of bankruptcies on family farms. And that 2025, okay, it's a lot easier. All right. And then 2025 has been the highest rate of farm bankruptcies since 2019, and that was through June of this year. I guess as we try to be clear-eyed about what we're facing, I guess what expectations should we have as we look to the future? Are we likely to see several years of difficult circumstances like we're seeing now, or is there any kind of do you guys have your pulse at all on things like family farm bankruptcies and whether those are accelerating? I'm just curious if you have any guidance, I guess, on that level.
Yeah, I don't have numbers on that. I mean, that's not something that I closely track. But the general state of the farm economy, I mean, all I keep hearing is, input costs are going way up and prices are going down. I mean, at least on the crop side, and so we're, I don't know if a precipice is too dramatic, but it's the trends are not good. So yeah, I mean, like I said, and like I guess Secretary Rollins indicated, there's, if things get bad, I think it's likely that there's going to, or maybe get worse. It's likely that there's going to be some sort of package. I mean, of course, there was already a lot of disaster assistance, price, the reference prices went up in the farm bill, things like that. So there's some of that already. But yeah, I mean, these, trade wars are bad for a reason. And it does have real world impacts. And so like I said, with sharing the information with, with your representatives through, with the administration, they need to have that information and know what the impacts are likely to be in your areas and with your operations. Because I'll as much as I may disagree with the trade strategy at times, I don't think anybody's doing this to bankrupt farmers. So where those impacts are where you can draw those links and help them understand the importance of resolving the issue. I mean, I think they do need to hear it as much as possible.
Thanks for your question, Adam. Ben Connor, thank you. Thank you for your thoughts, for your advice. Appreciate you coming on today and spending time with us. So thank you.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks to those who joined us today as well. Just a reminder, this will be posted on our YouTube as well as our website and social media platforms. And just a reminder to be on the lookout for our next From the Field topic and date. And we will see you next time here on From the Field Farm Chat with Idaho Wheat. Thanks for joining.